Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. I am joined in conversation by Steve Elfrink from the Psychedelic Somatic Institute, and we discuss a very different model of how to do psychedelic therapy, which differs quite considerably from the now somewhat standard model that has been developed by MAPS and also Johns Hopkins and other institutes. And, I'll leave it to the conversation to explain what those differences are and why. But first, let's get a couple announcements out of the way. First of all, thank you to Daniel for making a contribution to the podcast over this past week. If you would like to make a PayPal donation to the podcast, just stop by my webpage, martinball.net. There's the PayPal link at the top right of the page. And of course, it is the support of listeners that helps keep this going. It helps support me in doing this work. So if you like it, support it. That'd be great. And of course, as always, I do want to mention my Patreon page, patreon.com/martinwball, if you want to become a more regular supporter and get access to special gifts, exclusive content, and all the other perks that come with joining me over at Patreon. That would be awesome to join up at the spore level or the God molecule level, whichever suits you best. And let's see, do I have any other announcements? Of course, coming up, we have the U.S. presidential election. Going to see how that all turns out over the next days and weeks. Not sure who I'm going to have on the podcast next. I have various possibilities. Don't have any interviews lined up at the moment, but, they're coming. Anything else? No, I think that's all for now. Of course, I do want to mention I am available for 30, 60, and 90-minute consultations through my non-dual entheogenic integration services, which of course is non-dual-entheogenicintegration.com. If you want to check that out, just reach out and we'll set up a time to talk about whatever's going on with you, and I'm happy to help you out. So that's all for now. Let's get into the conversation with Steve Elfrink, and I think I'll throw in a little new music of my own at the end there, as usual. So, here's my conversation with Steve. Hope you enjoy. So my guest today on the Entheogenic Evolution podcast is Steve Elfrink, and he is joining me from, where are you right now? In Denver?
Williams, Oregon.
Williams, Oregon. Oh, so you're in the local woods.
I'm literally in the local woods, yes.
Oh, okay.
Happily in the local woods, yeah. Beautiful area up here.
Yeah, great. You were previously in Colorado, though?
No, actually Wisconsin. I think when I did the Exploring Psychedelics conference a few years back, that was like, 3-4 years ago. Yeah, I was living in Wisconsin, and then moved out to Oregon about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that you were actually in the local neighborhood at this point.
Yes, I'm a local. Yes.
Okay.
Well, hiding in the woods and doing a little hibernating up here, and now coming out of the psychedelic closet even more. So,
yeah. Well, great. As you just mentioned, you have been part of Exploring Psychedelics in years past, and you are today associated with the Psychedelic Somatic Institute. And this whole conversation that we're having now was initiated by Facebook. That I was on Facebook the other week, and I saw an advertisement for an event here in Ashland that caught my attention that was being put on by the Psychedelic Somatic Institute about training in psychedelic psychotherapy happening in Ashland. I was like, what is this? And so I reached out, and it ended up, it was you on the other end of the line there. And
small world.
Yeah. And you sent me an article to read that is in the current issue of the Journal of Psychedelic Psychiatry, which I didn't even know that there was a journal for that.
Yes.
And I read the article earlier today, this morning. Took me about an hour to go through the whole thing. And
it's beefy.
Yeah. And there's a lot of really, really interesting information and perspective in there. So I just want to say a few things as an introductory comments, and then I just want to hear from you because there's a lot that's going on in this article that I think is really, really fascinating. So just by point of introduction, of course, as you know, here in Oregon, coming up, we have the vote that's happening right now of potentially legalizing psilocybin-assisted therapy here in Oregon.
Yes.
And, but the work that's being done by MAPS and other institutes, that we are kind of on the cusp of having legal psychedelic therapy potentially throughout the United States, potentially throughout the world, that it does seem to be that this is where we are moving. Might not be this year, but it's the direction that we're headed in. And what I thought was really interesting about the article and what you guys are doing at the Psychedelic Somatic Institute is kind of working from a different model than what has kind of become the standard, at least in the research setting at this point. And I'm going to let you describe all of this more, but I just want to get into a couple things here. And because in reading the article, I found that I was really kind of going like, yay, yeah, I really like this, because the standard model is you give someone a powerful psychedelic experience and you completely leave them alone, and then you talk about it the next day or, over the coming weeks, and you have your integration sessions. And some kind of a controversial position that I have taken, for example, at this past summer, the World Bufo Alvarius Congress in Mexico City, one of the themes was integration. And lots of people were talking about, well, how do you integrate your 5-MeO-DMT experience after you've had it? And my talk was that if you attend to the energies that arise within the psychedelic session itself, and you process the energy there, the energies that are stored in the body and expressed through the body and expressed through one's being, that actually talking about it later is not that significant, because the integration is actually happening during the psychedelic event. And that's kind of the model that is being articulated in this paper and through the Psychedelic Somatic Institute, but in a lot more of a technical way. Sorry, my dog is making sounds in the background.
No
I'm sure that's showing up. That's the dog. It's not me, everyone. That's Moxie. So that's something that I really liked about it, that the article was saying that by attending to what arises from the stored trauma in the body of individuals during the session, that actually might have interaction with the client, not just letting someone lie on a bed, but working with them in that state, that you're actually resolving deeper levels of trauma that you can't access through talk therapy that happens afterwards. So I think it's all very exciting, a different kind of model. And so now I'm going to turn it over to you. Please tell us more about this, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about what sort of the standard model is, which is even odd saying that, since it's not really widespread and legal at this point yet, but it still is the standard model, and how the Psychedelic Somatic Institute is sort of challenging that. And then eventually I do want to get into talking about these therapist training programs that you guys are running.
Sure.
So that's enough from me. Let's hear from you, Steve.
So, yeah, thanks, Martin. That was a great tee up, and also appreciate the endorsement of kind of going in a new direction. I mean, for me, I've always been interested in psychedelic therapy. It's just been a huge passion of mine, primarily based on my own, exploration and trying to deal with my own trauma, my own PTSD, actually complex PTSD, and finding out that standard cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, was not working. Medications don't work. Nothing that I was finding in Western medicine was working. So I took a lot of matters into my own hands, and I got great results through some underground efforts. Also I was in a phase 1 FDA study with psilocybin through the University of Wisconsin in Madison, doing pharmacokinetic study. And so that also gave me a firsthand experience in the standard model. So the standard model, what we're talking about is, I call it, the headphones and eye shades. Mm-hmm. So you're given a large dose of psilocybin, or back in the day. And also, this is the model that's been around since the 50s. People are starting to work primarily with LSD, not sure how to work with it, and found out, hey, music and eye shades let the person just go with the experience, trust the medicine, all that. And so I went through that model, through, kind of, I would call it like the standard Johns Hopkins protocol.
Mm-hmm.
You got the FDA approved playlist for 8 hours. You've got your headphones, you got the eye shades, you've got a dyad of, 2 therapists, 1 male, 1 female, who are there as, guides, as sitters, kind of nudgers if, things get gnarly. But really the experience is meant to be non-directive. And for me, I saw, there was limitations. And also I'm not here to bash that model because there's incredible value in it. But also I think there's always a need for evolution in everything. And there's always, I want to be, I'm always interested in, pushing the envelope a little bit. And I think anything needs to be adjusted, needs to be tweaked. As we learn more, we can apply more. And that works with psychedelics too. So from my experience in that study and seeing some of the limitations, and I entered it as someone with, complex PTSD that actually was unknown at that time, and had, pretty horrendous experience because I did 3 escalating doses over 3 months. We were doing like some of the largest doses ever administered in an FDA study. So that experience, which it was profound and incredible, and it also left me going, I'm not sure about this.
Yeah.
And then, prior to PSI, I had an organization, a nonprofit called OmTerra, where I was doing 3-day symposiums, primarily in the Midwest. And then the third and last one, which was done in Madison, Wisconsin, I was looking for someone to present on ketamine, because ketamine clinics were starting to pop up more and more. And just, part of OmTerra and part of my drive was always wanting to explore what's on the edges, what's coming up, how do we improve this model? And my focus has always been on, even with OmTerra, as psychedelic therapy. And more of the, trying to lean more into the legal aspects of it, because I also saw many of the pitfalls of the underground community. And not to bash that either, because there's value in all this. And then there's also, for me, I'm always looking for improvements. And through that my final OmTerra conference, I met a gentleman named Saj Razvi. And Saj is the co-founder, so it's myself and Saj are the co-founders of PSI. And in Saj's presentation, which wasn't much on ketamine, but more starting to focus on stuff I had never heard of before, of ANS, the autonomic nervous system, and starting to present these ideas of trauma being held more in the body. Mm-hmm. And something just started to click there with me as far as, because I knew there was something better for folks, especially with complex PTSD, better than headphones and eye shades. So that was kind of the genesis. And originally, and I'll get into the model more, but it's kind of the pathway that has led us now to PSI. So back then, Saj had started a clinic called Innate Path, which is in Denver. And Innate Path is still in a functioning full psychedelic psychotherapy clinic in Denver with therapists seeing patients. And that's where kind of the model's been improved. And then now the model, what we've done is separated from Innate Path to create a new organization that's focused primarily on training. And so the greatest mission of PSI is training. And we're also approaching this from a more grassroots standpoint, because what we're trying to also do is, because we, like you said in the introduction, psychedelic therapy is coming. It's on its way. The wave is here. I mean, there's just no doubt. But also within the wave is a lot of corporate interest. And it's becoming this billion-dollar company, like Compass Pathways. And this is, I'm also not bashing the corporate interests. I mean, that's just part of capitalism and part of, our culture. But it's going to be somewhat, some of these larger organizations will be controlling. They're trying to patent the psilocybin molecule that they have. It'll be within their centers. And it's somewhat, to me, exclusive. And exclusive in who can play as far as the therapist. You have to be part of their system. And then also, you're part of an FDA system. You're part of a corporate system. And accessibility gets diminished. So one of our missions, and I would call us a mission-driven organization, is providing access to all those people who are looking for psychedelic therapy, whether it's from a therapist standpoint, So our focus is primarily on private practitioners. So people that are in their private practice, whether it's, SCOBY, I can't make up silly remote towns right now, but, Podunk, Kansas, or no offense to Kansas, but anywhere in the U.S., for people to have, if they have their private practice, to be able to provide psychedelic psychotherapy to their clients. So what makes the model unique is we're taking definitely a different approach. So the model that we're working with is called PSIP, or Psychedelic Somatic Interactional Psychotherapy. So one, with the psychedelic, what we're using is, primarily cannabis or ketamine right now because of the legality. And we're using cannabis in a way that no one's ever seen before. Not as a bragging right, but it's just a straight out fact that cannabis, which has traditionally been used specifically like with PTSD, is used as a calming agent, or if you have anxiety, to calm the anxiety. And our whole purpose is to do the exact opposite. What we're doing is going in and elevating anxiety and elevating, amplifying the panic attacks and everything else. And then also, this is a lot to cover in an hour, so bear with me, because we also need to talk about dissociation. We need to talk about the defense cascade. There's so much information here.
Yeah.
But the basic premise, what we're coming up with, is basically mental health is biological in nature. There's a huge component of basic evolutionary biology that takes place, or can take place, with the proper model, the little, some medicines on board, where something called the autonomic nervous system is activated. So what we're working with is, and this is from Robert and Carhart Harris, from Freud, but basically there's two levels of consciousness. We have secondary consciousness and primary consciousness. Secondary is our rational minds figuring out what we're going to fix for dinner. Where'd I put my keys? I got to make the mortgage payment. My life sucks. All secondary consciousness. Primary consciousness is more of that implicit self, the, kind of our core programming. If you look at like Freud's iceberg model with the subconscious, we're dealing with these kind of subterranean minefields. But also what we're finding is within trauma, where trauma is held is within primary consciousness, where there's the charge, where there's the emotional memories, the emotional events that were not processed are all stored in primary consciousness. So we've developed, and this has to, I have to give credit to Saj Razvi as far as the key person who's really, in his model, or this model's been birthed out of, like anything, taking bits of information from here, from there. So there's some of this could be attributed to Peter Levine's work, but totally different than, some people are familiar with somatic experiencing from Peter Levine, totally different. But it is based on, basic biological functions that happen during trauma. So that's kind of all over the place. Let me try to now bring it into a little more focus.
Yeah.
And then also, Martin, feel free to interrupt at any point.
No, this is all great. And I would also just remind everyone that in the, if you go to journalofpsychiatry.org/current-issue, there's the paper that describes all of this. And I definitely would encourage people to read through this, where you really do detail these different levels of consciousness and how the standard integration model is dealing with that second tier of consciousness, more the rational consciousness of what we can talk about, what we can identify, but that really what you're pointing towards here is a deeper level of processing that is taking place within the stored trauma within the body. And so then the question then is, well, how do we access that? And the answer that you're providing is, well, through psychedelic therapy, and that cannabis can be used in this way, ketamine. And also, interestingly, in the paper, you say that if someone is too stuck in that second tier consciousness, that psilocybin actually won't give them access to these deeper levels.
Yes.
So it's kind of turning the model on its head in some ways, which is, I love it, that it's very revolutionary. And like I said in my introduction, that I feel that it's articulating in a very specific way some of the things that I have tried to argue for within what makes the word is escaping me. What makes a psychedelic therapy session really effective, and that it's not, for me, it's never been about what you talk about afterwards. It's about what arises within that, and then how is that dealt with in that state. So,
yes.
But yes, so please continue.
Yes. So, I mean, it really, really boils down to biology, which is to me, the most beautiful thing about this model is its simplicity, and it's also empowerment to the client or patient that their body knows what it's doing. We've got millions of years of evolution dealing with trauma. And what's happened is big brain kicked in that tries to manage the trauma, try to suppress the trauma, because we're programmed as animals, because we are animals, to return to a homeostatic state. So after any traumatic event, we're evolutionary, biologically programmed to go to homeostasis, to return the body to normal. And I'll go into the defense cascade. But just through the other, the curse of evolution is also big brain, with this secondary consciousness that kicks in and tries to suppress this, and we don't want to feel it. And what the body's normal response to process trauma has been then suppressed. And what we're doing is basically opening up a huge gateway. And also, it's, I've done every major psychedelic out there, ibogaine to 5-MeO to peyote to ayahuasca to LSD, and like large doses and everything possible. And the most phenomenal experience I've ever had, and the most profound as far as from a healing perspective, has been this work. And with cannabis, which is the craziest part. Yeah. Little old cannabis.
Yeah.
So let me go into the concept, which is the foundation of the model, is the defense cascade. And this is just based on, this goes back to the age of Darwin. And a lot of this is just from observation from biologists out in the field. We're seeing animals in a traumatic event or experiencing traumatic events. So basically, there's 5 steps to this defense cascade. And we also call it the ANS map, or the autonomic nervous system map. But basically, we'll start at state 0. So state 0 is Hawaii. So you're like at the beach, you got a pina colada, you're with your sweetie, it's sunset, and everything is just chill. So this is our body at just a homeostasis at 0 point, let's say. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to bring in an animal model to this also. So let's say a gazelle is just out in a field, moseying around, eating some grass, chilling out. They're at state 0. But then that same gazelle sees off in the periphery, all of a sudden a lion appear at the edge of the savanna. All of a sudden a lion appears. So all of a sudden they're going to go, oh, lion. Okay, so they're going to go up to a state 1 where it's a bit of hyperarousal. So they're a little more hypervigilant, heart's going a little bit, but they're now on alert. And our bodies, there's different states where we can just kind of hang out. And we can hang out, animals can hang out in a state 1, we can hang out in state 1. Most people in America right now are in a constant state 1. Yeah. Always a little bit of stress, always a little bit of hypervigilant, got that startle reflex, looking around, waiting for the next threat. So, but gazelle's hanging out, munching on the grass, sees the lion over there. And then lion walks away, he can just go back to state 0. Okay, but lion's hanging out, so gazelle's in state 1, hypervigilant. So all of a sudden, the tiger or the lion decides he's going to go for it, starts chasing the gazelle. Now we're in classic fight or flight. Okay, so now the gazelle's like, holy smokes, got to run, flooded with adrenaline, heartbeat goes, it's, in a battle or not a battle yet, but just running for its life. So it's a classic state 2, fight or flight. Everything's pumping, everything's happening in that fight or flight state. So what then happens, though, where it starts to get fascinating, is so lion catches up to gazelle, captures the gazelle, and all of a sudden the gazelle is kind of like, oh my God. So it's going to go to a point of overwhelm, and then it's going to start entering dissociative states, which is, as part of evolution, it's a gift and a curse. So as the gazelle is now pounced on, it's going to start going into a state 3 of dissociation. So it goes to, there's a point of overwhelm, And now all of a sudden the body starts to go into dissociation. And dissociation is probably the most misunderstood aspect of mental health and its effect on people as far as trying to heal any of these, traumatic events, PTSD, which also then always ties into anxiety and depression and everything else. So our gazelle is what's happening in these states of dissociation is you start to get flooded, whether it's monkey, gazelle, or human, start to get flooded with endogenous opioids. So our body naturally creates opioids. So what the body's trying to do, though, is just, so we're about to die, it's not horrendous. So we're going to start to numb out.
Yeah.
So it's also what the lion or what that gazelle's experiencing is hopelessness, no exit. I'm kind of screwed here. But they're starting to also get flooded with opioids. So all of a sudden they're in that state 3, but there's the ability, all of a sudden the lion gets distracted by hyenas off on the side and glances away. That gazelle can pop out of that state 3 dissociation, go to a state 2 and run off. But if we have the other scenario where all of a sudden a pack of lions is coming in and the gazelle knows it's toast, it's going to go to a state 4 where they're just totally flooded with opioids. They're totally numbed out. And they've done research, Vanderkook, who's probably one of the more better researchers with all this, but it's equivalent to about 8 milligrams of morphine is what people are flooded out with in a dissociative state. So once that gazelle is it's going to die, it goes into a state 4, and state 4 is just numb. You're just totally, literally drugged, numb. They're not feeling anything. They can die somewhat in peace.
Yeah.
So then what happens, since we're animals, we go through the same thing, which is kind of the cool part. I mean, it's awful, but the cool part is the biological aspects of this healing trauma.
Yeah, the same mechanisms are there.
Yeah. And it's just biology. Yeah. I say it's biology, baby, because it's just, for me, the most empowering thing I've ever learned was one, looking at the ANS map and starting to go okay, I don't have a mental health issue. I have a biological issue. And it just started to make so much sense for me in my life and learning about being dissociative. I was one of those extreme birth trauma babies. I was born dissociative. I was born suicidal. And I never understood that until I started understanding biology.
Yeah.
So what happens? So someone who say was a child abuse or any traumatic event, because what'll happen in the animal world is, say that gazelle who was in a state 3 of dissociation gets away. And then there's the awesome National Geographic videos where that gazelle will go off and it'll lay down and start snorting. All these crazy noises start coming out. It's convulsing and it's releasing this charge because it went into this fight or flight, into dissociation, but and then they're being attacked. So there's this, implicit memory, body memory of the event. And what happens in the animal kingdom, that's discharged naturally.
Yeah. It's showing up as energetic presentations within the body of the trembling, the shaking, the making of the noises, and it's all involuntary. And it's the process that is just taking care of itself. And all of this is happening without an ego, right? The gazelle or the zebra, they don't have an ego. And of course it gets more complicated with humans because then we have an ego riding on top of all that, trying to make sense of it or suppress it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this is also where it gets super interesting with psychedelics, especially large dose, psilocybin, ayahuasca, whatever. And I'll talk about that. But so what happens in humans is exactly what you said, basically. So if someone goes into a traumatic event, let's say it's rape. So the male or female who goes into that rape situation, once it gets so intense, they're going to go dissociative. They're going to go to a state 3. And then they're going to end up in a state 4 where they're literally drugged. And this is also where, a lot of these memories are suppressed. A lot of it is the body not wanting to deal with it or the person not wanting to deal with it, but also they're in a drug state.
Yeah.
So memory, if you imagine if someone's on 8 grams of morphine and something's happening to them, are they going to remember all of it? Not so much from a secondary consciousness. But then kind of the messed up part, and just part of being human or animal, is the body remembers. And then, so what happens, and let's say in a rape situation, the person goes dissociative, it's over, but now they're left with being left in a dissociative state. There's no discharge, there's no release of any of this, and now all that's just packed in. And then what happens, like with over time, in a lot of times, working right now with this woman who's had just horrendous sexual abuse, and then also trigger warning for everyone. We might talk about some gnarly things here around sexual abuse and trauma, but in working with this, I don't want to get too far ahead. I'm trying to figure out the pacing here. Because what we're trying to do with the model, and because the beautiful thing, let me rewind a second here and go back to the ANS map. So the beautiful thing and the crazy thing, and to me, this is the most amazing thing about this model, is its textbook and how it works. So if we're working with someone, and for whatever reason, cannabis is unbelievable for working with dissociation. It cracks dissociation. The inside joke is cannabis does not abide dissociation. Mm-hmm. And it works better than MDMA, works better than psilocybin, works better than anything we've worked with in cracking dissociation. Because the standard model out there for most therapeutic models is if someone goes dissociative, you want to pull them out of it. Don't let them go dissociative. Our model is the exact opposite, because we want someone, and we see this constantly, where someone goes into dissociative state and you just get to recognize this, and it's a cold wave. So states 1 and 2 are hot waves, where people are like, heartbeats going, they're sweating, get the blankets off, it's fight or flight, panic, everything's coming out. And then states 4 and 3, especially state 4, where we know someone's gone dissociative, because they'll just all of a sudden go blank. And you'll go, where are you? Nowhere. Just, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, just
what do you
down.
feel? Yeah, what do you feel? Nothing.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Yeah, I'm cold. Are you okay? Yeah. I don't think it's working right now. I'm like, oh, okay, good. It's not working. Okay, let's just stay with that. It's not working. And you're feeling blank? Yeah. Okay, let's stay with blank. Let's just go into blank and look at all blank has to have, everything it has for you. Mm-hmm. And you just keep them in blank. So the crazy thing about the models, so they're now in a state 4. So this is induced by cannabis, and I'll go into how we do that through a process called selective inhibition. But they're in a state 4, and every time you hold them in there, and like with MDMA, because Saj was part of the phase 1 MDMA trial with MAPS, and with MDMA dissociation, you could see someone stay in it for 8 hours, the whole MDMA session. My own experience, I didn't know about dissociation. I did underground MDMA with sitters, and I didn't know it, but I went dissociative. And it's awful. In this one level, because it feels like, for me, it felt like I was having a bad trip. And I was like the first person to have a bad trip on MDMA, because I just felt nothing. I was just blank. But there was like zero blank. No emotions, no anything. And it was very disorienting. But the crazy thing, so like cannabis, someone will stay maybe 10 minutes, maybe, not usually more than a half hour in a dissociative state. But then you'll see it when it cracks, all of a sudden they've gone from blank, and you're just holding them there. All of a sudden it's like, I'm feeling hopeless. You're like, sweet.
So they
what they're doing is
they're feeling the negative emotions. They're feeling the negative energies at that point.
They're coming out. So it's this like literal pathway that the body follows. So, but you climb out. So you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And the only way out is 4, 3, 2, 1. Mm-hmm. And they climb out of it. So all of a sudden you're dissociative. There's they feel nothing. And all of a sudden they start feeling suicidal. I feel like I just want to kill myself. I feel like this is the worst depression I've ever had. I'm just hopeless. And they're just like despondent. But what we do is we keep them in there. They're just like, oh, depression, hopelessness, no exit. Oh, good. You're doing good work.
Yeah.
And you just keep them there. Then all of a sudden, and they're like, it's cold and they're shivering. Then all of a sudden you're just waiting for it because you know it's going to happen. All of a sudden, oh my God, I'm hot.
Yeah.
Because they covered up because they're cold, because states 3 and 4 are cold waves. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I'm hot. Oh, my heart's going to, like, it's going to beat out of my chest. And they start hyperventilating. They're having panic attacks. And we, as, you know, sitting there with them and interacting with them, are going, yay, here we go. Because we know they're going, I'm not saying yay as a flippant, but it's, you just know they're going through what we call a wave, a big wave. Also, now they're in fight or flight. There's panic. This is where reenactment starts. This is where the memories now come back too. Mm-hmm. So like this lady I've been working with is the all repressed memory, and this dissociative states, they don't remember it. And also when they come out of it and go into a state 2, the fight or flight, the panic, the reenactment, no, pushing away everything as if they're in the event. But that's, pure panic, pure fear, just, it's can be, and this is also from a therapist perspective, it's very intense work to witness someone going through this process.
Definitely.
So you'll see them go through the state 2, then it gets a little more calmer, and then they're like back to a state 0, typically for a few minutes. And then they're going to process another wave. And people will just do wave after wave after wave after wave. And eventually you can, also the other beautiful thing about this is all finite. And depending on the severity of trauma, but there's a finite amount of what we call a charge. And charge is basically the emotions, the memories. The emotions can be grief, sadness, terror, horror, repulsion, pain. And then a lot of pain comes out from the event, because the body was numb, but the body's still feeling the pain. Mm-hmm. So pain is coming out, and that's what we call charge. And then with complex PTSD, sometimes, with a standard, there can be event trauma that comes out. Complex PTSD can be sometimes just, there's no association. It's just crazy. For me, it feels almost like alien feelings coming out. But it's just this charge is coming out, and it's phenomenal work as far as one to witness it and one to experience it. And it's hard to understand it until you've experienced it, because most people have never experienced a full ANS discharge. And the way this is working is basically what we're doing is incorporating cannabis, or it works with ketamine, it works with MDMA. And also part of this is just this tiered system that we have as far as working. Tier 1 is just body. Before we, part of our proposal is working with body, working with this charge before you go into any of the higher medicines. But it's kind of like clearing out the canoe before you go out into the ocean. So what we're doing is just clearing these charges as much as possible. And the way it works, if we're working with cannabis, typically it's just with a vape pen. Typically 1 to 2 hits is all it takes. And all we're doing, and I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar with the default mode network, all the work from Robin Carhart Harris. Default mode network, basically the conductor of our brains controlling everything. And all we need is a little suppression or opening, because what we're doing is kind of suppressing, opening the default mode network a little bit. And what happens, and then when we're doing, so the executive functioning is reduced, just even through the cannabis. And the key to our work is something called selective inhibition. So what we have is normal coping mechanisms. We can fidget, we can stretch, we can do our wiggles, we do things all consciously I call it off-gassing, because if someone with PTS, I call it a trauma ball. The trauma ball, because the body just wants to release this stuff. So it comes out as anxiety, it comes out as fidgeting, it comes out through, sex, through food, through distraction of Instagram, all these ways, but we're just trying to off-gas. The body's constantly just wants to get rid of this. So it's like, hey man, millions of years we released this stuff, now you guys are cramping it down, or I just want to get it out. That's what body is saying. So through something called selective inhibition, the way the model works basically is you have the person, and typically we do a dry run first. When you're starting with someone, a dry run is no medicine. And so what we're doing is inhibiting standard coping mechanisms. So, and we do use eye shades, but no headphones or no music. What we found, like most people, like no music. They don't want the music because there's no like insight. There's no traveling through time and space. It's all like body, 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 body. It's purely body. So selective inhibition, the person sitting down, hands on their knees, eye shades on. You don't have to have eye shades, but it just helps to just close out anything. And then what the therapist is doing is, one, directing them about, hey, we're going to do this process, selective inhibition. Any normal coping mechanisms that you have, I want you to suppress. So if you normally like stretch or if you like start to wiggle, don't. And also, I'm going to call out any movement I see. So if the therapist sees the finger twitch, I just saw your finger twitch. Let's try to restrict that. Okay, you just arched your back. No, don't do that. Remember what we talked about. Okay. Then you just have the patient or the clients then start to like, okay, I really want to stretch. Okay, we're not going to stretch. Okay, I'm starting to feel like warm. Okay, good. Let's go into warm. Okay. And also, my shoulder twitched. Good. I saw that. Yeah. Okay, keep your hands still. And then what we're going to then start to do is then take them in this dry run, what we do is a non-relational traumatic event, like a car accident, surgery, any event that doesn't have a relational component, because we don't want to take them that far down the train yet. So, and they start recalling that event, and what we're doing is then breaking it down in like super detail about a traumatic event with no coping mechanisms. And what happens, the body's just like, screw this. Something's coming up.
Yeah.
So, and you can get an illicit kind of an autonomic system, somewhat of a release without medicine, but with cannabis on board, it's just amplified 10 to 100-fold of what happens. So we'll go through a dry run, then we can just, a couple hits on a vape pen, which is beautiful for Oregon since it's recreational, makes it very easy.
Yeah.
As far as access. And then once they do the 2 hits, I usually just, for me, I'm like Mr. Sensitive when it comes to medicines, 1 hit, and then go through the same scenario. And then what's crazy is what happens. Because all of a sudden they're just talking about the event. And then all of a sudden they'll either start going, some people usually with the first sessions, it's a little more, I call it like chaos. There's incoherence because the body's trying to like figure out this pathway. And then the amazing thing is as you do more sessions, this becomes the preferential pathway for these medicines. So the first, from a therapy standpoint, working with someone, the first like 3-4 sessions, there's a lot of nudging and all that. But after that, it's like cannabis and it's go time. Because the body, once it's discovered this pathway, it's like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
It knows how to follow it.
Yeah, so that's what, and then so the therapist then is just nudging to keep them in, but it's really, there's still directive, but not as much as the first few sessions. And it's the biggest thing from a directive is keeping them in their body, and then also I can go more into like somatic looping and these other things where you have to know some interventions. There's transference that starts to happen where they start projecting everything out on you when they're especially in a state 2, and now you're the perpetrator. But the amazing thing is once that preferential gateway is open, what they'll do is usually there'll be a little chaos, especially in the first session, but a lot of times if there's dissociation, they'll go right to dissociation. And they'll just all of a sudden they're like, twitching and moving, little tremors are happening and they're like, the body's just responding and it's purely autonomic. It's crazy to watch. As the body just starts, little convulsions, little like movements are happening, and then they can go into dissociation, but then we just keep them in dissociation, like I said earlier.
Yeah. If I could just interject a few things
Sure.
here, because I'm just fascinated, like hearing you say all of this stuff, because this is everything that you've mentioned here these are all things that I have seen in conducting sessions with people with 5-MeO. And really working. I mean, of course, I was not coming from this model because I didn't have access to this model, but just exactly what you're talking about here, that so much of my time in working with people with 5-MeO is pointing out that, okay, did you notice that you just twitched your foot? Did you notice that you just raised your eyebrow? Did you notice how you're squirming? And actually, right before we got on this call to do this interview, I was doing a consultation session with someone who had had a few sessions with 5-MeO. And so we were talking about his sessions and how he was reacting and what showed up physically within his body, which is something I always cover with people. And then we were also talking about his personal relationship, and he was talking about divorce with his wife and some of the history there. And it was, exactly what you're talking about here, that as he was talking about his wife and his divorce, that he was touching himself, and he was actually reaching up and massaging his shoulders. And then in me giving him feedback, I pointed all these things out to him. He had no idea that he had done any of those things.
Yes.
He didn't know that he was massaging his own shoulders whenever he talked about his wife. And that's like step number one, is like getting people to notice these things. And then just like you're saying, we become aware of them and then resist doing that so that you can go into what is the energy that's underneath, rather than engaging in the coping mechanism that's what allows you to uncover the hidden energy that then needs to release itself through these waves of energy that then pass through the person, through the vibrating, the shaking, the grunting, the groaning, the crying, and all this. It's just amazing that you are describing exactly what I have seen and how I've worked with people. And it's just so interesting to see this reflected in this model, and then to hear that it's coming out of work with cannabis is just fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. And again, cannabis is the superior medicine for this work, better than MDMA, and primarily for dissociation. Because like I said, MDMA, you could stay in dissociative state for 8 hours.
And what good is that going to do you? Nothing.
It actually, it will, because even if someone's, they're just in it for 8 hours, but it does, even keeping them in it for 8 hours, it's starting to crack. It's just taking a longer time. Yeah. Because it's starting, just keeping them in there, one, it's from more of a body awareness level. And then, so if someone's 8 hours in dissociation from MDMA session 1, MAP study, now we have to wait a month, they're going to pick up pretty much in a dissociative state, same place, but it will crack. Yeah. Cannabis, 10 minutes, 20 minutes in dissociation, and then all of a sudden hopelessness. Yeah. And all of a sudden panic, and then.
Yeah. And it's the cracking and then moving through the energies that arise that becomes the therapeutic process itself. Like that, my model for working with 5-MeO DMT is the great breakthrough oneness. That's fantastic. But that's not really what working with it is about. Working with it is opening up the energies and making sure all those energies get expressed and processed through, so that when someone is done with their session, they feel that they've gone through it and then ground it out. And you seem to be speaking from a similar model, that's where the therapeutic action is actually taking place, is by moving through these energies, experiencing them, releasing them, and then getting back down to baseline. Yes. And it's not about, was it all one? Was it a big mystical experience, which is a great component of it, but that's not the therapeutic work of it.
No. So and some of this is more of stirring the pot a little bit, but my basic premise and statement is insight doesn't heal trauma.
Yeah. I would agree. I would thoroughly agree.
And because that's a huge one, because I've experienced unity consciousness, non-duality. I've experienced this high indifference, which was above everything. Like the most crazy, beautiful states and insights possible. And it was like a relief, and it was like, wow. And then 3 months later, year later, so whatever, I'm depressed and anxious. Yeah. Because the trauma ball is still there.
Yeah. It wasn't processed.
It was not processed. It wasn't until I started doing this work and going into cold waves and cracking dissociation. My biggest one, the other beautiful thing about this work is, once people, again, depending on levels of trauma, once people have like crack dissociation moved a huge, chunk of this, and it's finite because it's not an infinite supply of trauma or charge. It's packed in there from the events, but it can be released. But you can get to a point where, like, I started doing my own sessions. So like one of my most profound was literally probably like 6 months ago in the Redwoods, camping in my van, did a hit of cannabis, did my own selective inhibition, went into a monster dissociative wave, and just started trembling, shivering like I never had, where the shivering became like micro shivering, like every cell was, and cracked that layer of dissociation. And again, most of my trauma is birth trauma, which is just crazy trauma because it's all nonverbal. But cracking that was probably one of the bigger life-changing events of all the work I've done. But it's the empowerment for me. I'm all about empowerment, and I'm from empowerment for the therapist to be able to provide this work, for a client to understand it's not like a mental health issue, because everyone's been told there's there's something wrong with you. This is mental health, and obviously there's mental health components, but the biggest thing is this is biology, and your body. Trust your body. And for me, like once I was doing my initial sessions, where what got me through more and more is just, and what I would do in my own sessions is just kind of this mantra, but it's just body. Because my mind, because this is what I want to go into with psychedelics, because my mind, so there's this energy coming out, and then my mind, which is somewhat crazy, tries to put meaning to it.
Right.
And the meaning is typically, I'm losing my mind. Call 911 is what I would hit. But through the work, I was able to just, body, trust my body, and just kind of take a back seat and just let this thing happen. And it's to me, it's still the most crazy thing I've been through.
Yeah.
It's more crazy than, sitting in a yurt doing ayahuasca and flying over the Andes as a condor and all that fun stuff. But which is cool. But this work, it's like so profound from a just human animal biological processing, moving the shit out.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, the feeling of lightness, of, openness, more, for me, it's been more gratitude, more just presence, more, there's that noise of anxiety because it's all been discharged.
Yeah.
So one thing whoops, I'm sorry, go ahead. So much to talk about.
I know there's so much, but just a couple things I wanted to jump on was that, just kind of metaphorically speaking, one of the things that I've always said is that, look, you can go out infinitely.
Yes.
You can fly as a condor over the Andes. You can talk to aliens. You can go out infinitely, but none of that is really therapeutic. That it's, you go in, and then as you say, there's actually a finite amount of energy to process and release there. And that when people are going through that process, it can definitely feel infinite. Like people are like, oh my God, I'm going to be throwing up forever, or I'm going to be vibrating forever. And that, as you say, that's just the mind coming in and saying, oh, I'm identifying this shit. I'm stuck here. This is going to be forever. But actually, once you go through it and it releases and it discharges, then it's done. Yes. And then you feel better.
Yes. Yes.
And that even though it feels like, oh, I'm going to be stuck here forever, no one ever is, if they allow the process to take place. If their mind gets in and stops it, and then they try and avoid it, and then try and project out like, oh no, well, I want to see rainbows and fairies and unicorns, then they're actually disrupting the process of that going inwards into those body energies and letting them sort out.
What we found, the crazy thing about this is once it's activated, it's pretty damn near impossible to stop it once it's going. Like my first cannabis session, the nice thing also about cannabis, it's a 2-hour session typically. It's not like 8 hours. 5-MeO has its brevity, which is awesome too. But like cannabis, 2 hours, you can also titrate it. So, they do a single hit, start doing waves, and then they start coming out a little bit, do another hit. So you can titrate it. But like the first time I did it, so much charge. I was also, I think, wired for this. A 2-hour session became 4 hours because it wouldn't stop. It was just wave after wave after wave of these charges coming out. And yeah, I was 4 hours in, and then trying to like put ice on my chest and trying to like pull me out of it a little bit, because I could not stop it, because my body was like, we're going. We're going. And then, so one thing I want to mention is in relation to psychedelics, and also this to me is somewhat of a, not a warning, but just a cautionary tale, because I know this is an N of one being me, my experience, especially in like high doses. So I think, so if you have this trauma ball and it's energy that wants to come out. So say like in my, the UW-Madison psilocybin study, where I went through 3 doses of hell realms and human suffering and psychosis and demonic possession and demons and just crazy stuff. So this charge starts coming out, and then someone like me, who's got a very powerful mind, because I lived in my mind most of my childhood, tries to put meaning to it. Mm-hmm. So it takes this, which is just energy, and this energy becomes demonic. Right. This energy becomes psychosis. Right. This energy becomes, literally, it's trauma. Yeah. And I'm torturing myself. And because I'm trying to put meaning to what's just my body's trying to like, hey, dude, we just want to like discharge some of this.
Yeah. We just want to sort this out. But if you want to make a grand story and torture yourself, go for it.
And that's what I did. And I think that's the challenge with some of these, folks with, and I didn't know the level of trauma I had going into that study. But someone who, and I've lost 2 friends to ayahuasca who committed suicide, but more, right now, or knowing now that it was like unresolved trauma, it's triggered and it's too much, and the mind went crazy with it. Yeah. And then can't handle it. So for me, the beauty of this work, and this is why, we're really proposing this tiered system of, body, just really focus on this charge to find out if someone's got, I think, personal opinion, obviously, anyone who's going to, before they go into a journey, especially someone first time, let's see where you are with dissociation. Because a lot of people, I didn't know I had dissociation. I didn't know what it was. And then through this work, it's like, oh my God, there it is. But to be able to like work with folks to clear the dissociation, clear some of this trauma, or a huge chunk of it, as that's what we call it's a 3-tiered system. Tier 1 is, and I said this before, but body. With ideally with cannabis, once MDMA is on board legally, you can. But I would still do cannabis first before MDMA, because once the dissociation is cracked, the preferential pathway is opened. Then you can slip someone into an MDMA session where it's a longer time to just process more in that preferential pathway, clear that out. And then what we are proposing is a tier 2, working with low dose psilocybin. So, if we're looking at dried grams, kind of like that 2 to 3 dried grams. And this is what we were doing in Amsterdam. So we were doing work there before COVID. And the other thing we discovered is, I'll get back to the tier 2, but in relationship to Amsterdam, because we had people flying to Amsterdam to do psilocybin. I was like, oh, it's legal. It's with truffles, but I can do psilocybin. Yay. Right. I've had all this trauma. Dose them with, and we ended up doing pretty large doses of psilocybin and no response. Yeah. They were just kind of like, well, nothing's happening. Some visuals and not much. And then try a larger dose, 2 days later, nothing. And then like, let's go back to cannabis and try cannabis. Everything's happening. There's the dissociation, fight or flight. Everything's going nuts for the person. And then follow it up with psilocybin. And now we're having an experience with the psilocybin, but not until we crack the dissociation and move some of this charge. And then what we're finding is then working with folks, because I don't know if it's crazy, but anyone who's been living with trauma their whole life has created a persona based on managing that trauma. Right. And their whole life is filtered, at a subconscious level, obviously, of managing that trauma, the traumatic event, and they've become person A based on that trauma ball. what we're finding is you can remove the trauma, but then there can still be this habitual thinking, habitual patterns that still exist. But working in like low dose psilocybin, once the charge is removed, you can start kind of detangling that. And that's where some of this like insight is then useful. But more of like pulling apart what we call the fabric of reality that was created from all that, that charge that that person has been living with. Work with that. And that only, it can be 2 to 3 sessions. And then if someone wants to go into the mystical experience, which there is value, go there, then do, high dose psilocybin or ayahuasca, whatever you want to do. And then also in the ceremonial context, there's value there for the community feeling and the puppy pile of love after a ceremony. But our biggest kind of, and not warning, but just as far as, our whole mission here is how do we improve these models?
Yeah.
How do we, because this wave is coming, my fear with the wave that's coming is this one size fits all. You have treatment-resistant depression. Here's 5 grams of, or whatever, the 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams of pure psilocybin, and it's kind of like good luck. And I'm being a little dramatic there, but working with treatment-resistant depression, where they're trying to go with this, but not understanding one dissociation, not moving, cracking dissociation first. I think the results are not going to be as favorable. I think, like psilocybin, large dose, end of life, all the work at Hopkins, UCLA, NYU, with that demographic, I think it's beautiful. And those people, the end of life, where the body wants to go is, let's just go mystical.
Yeah.
Let's have that unity consciousness. Let's have that. Let's reframe, understand life is beautiful. That's awesome. But what I don't want to see is psychedelic. And I know there's value, and I'm not trying to bash high dose psilocybin treatment, all the studies that are going on out there. But I do think wholeheartedly, and I know I'm involved with the company and all that, but it's also from a mission driven aspect that there's a better way before we go into those states, and a better way of understanding dissociation, a better way to understand we're freaking animals. We have this biological response. And that, mental health is actually, there's a huge chunk of mental health that is biological health.
Yeah. Well, I think it's such a great way to really open up the conversation around psychedelic therapeutics, and really that I don't think that there should just be one model. And I really do like what you're proposing here. And I also like that in the paper that I've referenced, and I'll say the link again, it's journalofpsychedelicpsychiatry.org, kind of towards the end of the article, talk about how these therapeutic models, these are also different from the traditional, group ceremonial model, which you describe as more of a form of worship and communal activity, which is not necessarily therapeutic, but that it served indigenous communities, but that for the modern Western pathological mindset that we have, and that kind of as you were describing, that we're all kind of in this level of stress, level of trauma already just by the society that we live in, that, that those traditional models might not necessarily work for us. And that's actually, it's a big thing that comes up in the consultations that I do with people, where they say, well, I went down to South America and I sat in an ayahuasca circle, and now I'm coming out of it, and I am more depressed and I'm more confused than I was before. And I think that it's exactly speaking to that yes, they've had thousands of years of using ayahuasca that way. It doesn't mean that necessarily is going to fit what problems modern Western individuals are bringing to their psychedelic sessions, so that we do need to have more openness and more investigation of what really does work for us in this context versus someone who's lived in the jungle their entire life.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And also with all that, and I know we're on the same page on this one, and I know people have gotten benefit from that work. And again, I don't want to bash any of that. But also, just really back to the one size fits all does not exist. Yeah. And even with this model, I'm not saying everyone should do this. At some levels I am, just to understand kind of where you're at, of a litmus test of what's held there. To work with cannabis first it's accessible. It's it's just, I mean, it's pretty relatively easy to work with someone as far as getting them into this, because the body wants to do this. But just to kind of find out where they're at and what's going on, it's just a great way to understand that. And then we've also found, excuse me a second.
Yeah.
Pretty much anyone we've worked with, because we've done, people have done a lot of work, consider themselves self-actualized. We've done like super healthy. One was this, cannabis multimillionaire, super good childhood, great wife, kids, just kind of the perfect, life this guy went through, and was curious about the work, did a single session and went into it. Yeah. And what he went into was he got a DWI like 3 or 5 years ago and thought he had processed it and, stopped drinking, and, he lost his license, and then he was riding his bike, lost a ton of weight. And it was like this positive thing in his life. But he went into a session, and where he went into was held charge around guilt and shame that he didn't know existed.
Yeah.
And all that came out, just the, tears and the shame and all this, that it was packed in there. And then afterwards, reporting back, it's like, man, this changed my life, because I didn't realize this filter of guilt and shame affected my relationship with my kids, with my wife, with my business partners. And it was just this huge tune-up for him.
Yeah.
From, a 2-hour cannabis session.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing to emphasize, that even by outward appearance and, how someone's life seems to be together or not together is not necessarily telling of what's residing deeply within them. That's why when I was serving 5-MeO to people, I always did 3 rounds. And I always said, look, the first round is the diagnostic round. And this is where we're going to see where these things arise and then what actually needs to be worked on, that it's not just about a one-off experience, that you do need to have that diagnostic kind of to see what energies show up within this person, and that you could take someone who seems like, oh, they're going to have an easy time. Then actually there's all kinds of trauma that's arising. And then other people who are really fidgety, that they actually might even have an easier time because maybe they're more used to processing their uncomfortable sensations and emotions. I think there's still so much more that we could talk about here. I do need to get on another call in like 10 minutes, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But let's talk about the training programs. Yeah,
sure. So our focus is, one, improving the model, and then training. And again, I want to reiterate that we're really focused on this grassroots movement to provide, literally today, psychedelic or access to psychedelic therapy for private practitioners. So we're doing a training in Ashland, January 9th through the 13th. And the training model, it's 5 days of in-person training. And the first day and a half is pretty much didactic. And then the rest of the days is actually doing sessions. And it starts with what we call fishbowl sessions, where the primary trainer will be doing sessions, or a session, a medicine-assisted session, when Oregon will be using cannabis with one of the participants, walking people through primarily what you're learning is the selective inhibition in the first phase. And then also the therapist or whoever's participating will start doing trades with each other, doing sessions guided by PSI staff. So it's very experiential. The only way to understand the model is to do it. And then another huge point and part of this model is whoever's doing this work or providing it is doing a lot of sessions, because you have to clear your stuff out before you're going to start working with folks. Yeah. Because there's so many triggers that can happen, because this is profoundly intense, what you can uncover in folks. And, we could go a whole another podcast on transference, but dealing with transference, dealing with these emotional charges, because you have to be able to just hold super solid space. Yeah. So a huge part of it is therapists doing their own work. And then what we also then provide is 8 months of supervision. So you go through the initial training and then 8 months of supervision. And the supervision is in the first 6 weeks, it's every week. And those first 6 weeks, and what we're doing is, these regional trainings. So then whoever's going through the training can do trades with, another student. But for 6 weeks, you're just doing trades back and forth and then reporting back and through the supervision process of what's going on and what's not working, what's working. But the big focus on the 6 weeks, though, is the student processing their own charges. And it's really intense for most students because everyone's got stuff in there, and most people don't realize what's in there, and this kind of pops that bubble. So it can be kind of destabilizing at first, but we want, our theory is if there's not destabilization, that you're not doing the work right. But the nice thing is it's really hard not to do it right. But there's going to be a destabilization factor in that first 6 weeks, which is part of this whole process. That's why we're there to hold the hands through it. So, and then our website is just psychedelicsomatic.org, psychedelicsomatic.org. And then there's information about the training. There's a ton of videos on there. We're constantly uploading more videos. We tape a lot of our sessions and annotate them. So we're trying to start to educate people on this process. Because one, it's unheard of what we're doing as far as working at this level, and not unheard of, but in psychedelic space, pretty much unheard of, focusing on the biological component, then also focusing on cannabis as an access tool. And again, it's not to calm anything. We're not doing cognitive behavior therapy as someone smokes weed. We're just using it as a catalyst to open up this gateway to the autonomic nervous system. Yeah.
And where are some of the other trainings taking place?
We've got one in Portland coming January 23rd, 27th. We're doing one in November 14th in LA, San Francisco, first part of December. We just added one in Phoenix, second part of December. February will be in Australia, COVID permitting. We're also doing Seattle, Boston, Netherlands, Chicago. I mean, we've got through 2021 pretty much filled. Wow. But also the other huge thing we're willing to do is if we have 12 people, so if you're in Bow Weevil, Texas, you've got a psychotherapy community, or you can get 12 people together, and we'll do everything possible also to help get the 12 people through introductory webinars. We'll go anywhere where we've got 12 people, because our biggest goal is the accessibility factor. And the other, I know we got to run, but even in states where there's, most states will have medicinal cannabis at least, but if even that's not possible, like in Minnesota, we're doing a training this weekend. Medicinal cannabis is tough to get, but ketamine is easy. Mm-hmm. So we're focusing the training on ketamine. It's the same model, but because ketamine in some of these states is easier to get than cannabis. Yeah. So we work with a MD or a prescriber who's willing to prescribe ketamine, which is just a Schedule III drug. And it can be used where it's just the patient or client gets a prescription through the prescriber for ketamine and then shows up at a session and just takes the ketamine before the session, and you're off to the races. Wow. So if we don't have cannabis, we have a model to get people access to ketamine. And it's not, the therapist is not, the model is you don't give the participant cannabis, you don't give them ketamine, they show up and they're doing it on their own free will through psychoeducation that this is, this stuff works, and it's their choice to do it. But so there's a model that works for anywhere in the U.S., and we just need, 12 people. And what we're looking for is mental health practitioners, so psychotherapists, and then also healing arts professionals. And so on an individual basis, someone with a healing arts background, our biggest thing is you've had some clinical experience sitting with folks in some of these intense states. And so, if you're a psychotherapist, it's easy to get in. If you're a healing arts professional, it's just an application process, and we'll talk to you and see where you're at. But our biggest thing is accessibility. So getting the word out, we want I don't like to use the army, but we want as many practitioners out there in the private practice to be providing work that actually, more than anything I've ever found, and most people who go through it will say the same thing. It's like nothing they've ever done that actually gets to the root of stuff that people have been dealing with and managing and trying to cope with and put Band-Aids on. Yeah. We're not about Band-Aids. We're about symptom resolution.
Yeah. To me, I would describe it as sort of a direct energetic process, not dancing around the ideas and the thoughts, but going into the energy of what's there and helping that to resolve on its own.
Yes. Letting the body know what it's been doing or been programmed to do and wants to do for millions of years. That's all we're doing.
Wow. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Once again,
The website is psychedelicsomatic.org, and I highly encourage people read the article as well of Journal of Psychedelic Psychiatry.org, the current issue. It's fascinating work. I wish you and the Institute the best of luck in all of these trainings. And yeah, let's open up the model. Let's introduce new therapeutic methodologies. It's fantastic.
Cool. And then the final thing, thank you, Martin. Thanks for having me on. I definitely appreciate it. And we have to have lunch soon.
Yes.
And then, people can also reach out to me just at steve@psychedelicsomatic.org.
Okay.
So any questions, anything, I'm more than happy to talk about any of this. And I'm here to help folks and here to serve. So anything I can do, I'm 100% on board for.
Great.
But thank you, Martin. I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. And thank you for your time today, Steve.
Yeah. You take care.
Okay.
you.